What would you do if your GPS led you to a deserted stretch of I-95 in South Carolina, a highway known for some of the highest fatality rates on the East Coast, and the only people you met quickly turned from victims to predators? Eric Miller, a long-haul trucker with nearly 15 years behind the wheel, thought he was taking a simple detour. He didn't expect a confrontation that would leave him running for his life, or the chilling realization that someone was still watching him after he escaped. What he found waiting under his windshield wiper will keep you awake tonight. Even the most familiar roads can hide dangers you never see coming. Lauren Carter had driven through her fair share of storms. After 10 years hauling freight across the country, she considered herself prepared for almost anything. But on a humid summer night along Interstate 10 in Louisiana, heading west over the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge, a stretch that ran for 18 miles over open water, the weather turned against her. The rain came down so hard her wipers only smeared it across the glass, and the wind made the truck shudder. She tightened her grip on the wheel. The bridge ahead felt less like a road and more like a thin line suspended above the unknown. She'd heard warnings before about bad weather in Louisiana, but this downpour was different. The CB radio crackled with static, but every so often a voice cut through, warning about high water at mile marker 34 and delays piling up behind flooded roads. Carter glanced at the clock, thinking about her deadline. Dispatch had already pushed her to keep moving. She pressed on, telling herself it was just another night. What she didn't know was that hours of relentless rain had already pushed the basin's levees past their limit. Water was rising fast beneath the bridge, working its way into places it shouldn't have reached. Somewhere below, a flaw in the bridge's structure, small enough to be overlooked, but dangerous after years of weather and wear, was about to give way. The first sign came when the truck ahead of her jerked sideways, its trailer jackknifed, blocking the lane, the cab tilting dangerously close to the edge. Carter stomped the brakes. The screech cut through the storm, and her own trailer lurched as she fought to keep control. Through the rain-streaked windshield, she saw the road ahead take on a strange, dipping shape. A deep, unnatural sag appeared in the concrete, and then came a low, gut-deep groan. In the next instant, a section of the bridge, 30 feet or more, simply disappeared, dropping into the black water below. Everything stopped for a second. The world went silent except for the rain. Then the chaos returned all at once. Carter watched as cars and trucks behind the collapse skidded toward the gap. A compact car vanished with barely a splash. Another semi too close to stop went nose first into the water. Steam rose up as its engine hit, and a muffled explosion followed. The sound of metal bending and drivers shouting mixed with the storm, and Carter could barely process what she was seeing. She forced herself to focus. Her truck was still on solid ground, but the edge of the collapse wasn't far. The jackknifed rig in front of her was leaning at a dangerous angle, and the driver inside was waving, trapped. Carter didn't pause. She threw on her high-visibility jacket, grabbed her flashlight, and put her truck in park. The storm hit her as soon as she opened the door. Rain stung her face and turned the bridge's surface slick. She moved fast, boots slipping as she ran to the stranded cab. The man inside looked terrified. Carter tried the door, but it wouldn't move. She shouted, but the wind took her words. Remembering her emergency kit, she sprinted back to her own truck, grabbed a crowbar, and hurried back. By then, the fire had started. The first truck that fell was burning, orange flames lighting up the rain. Carter wedged the crowbar into the doorframe and pulled with everything she had. The door finally gave, and the driver half fell into her arms. He was older than she expected, shaking, mumbling thanks as she helped him away from the edge. Behind them, the cab of his truck shifted, then slid, taking the whole vehicle down. Back in her own cab, Carter peeled off her soaked jacket and tried to catch her breath. The collapse had left her only a few truck lengths from the edge. She watched as other drivers stopped to help or sped past, desperate to get away from the disaster. Sirens started up in the distance, and soon the bridge was filled with emergency lights and shouting. Carter stayed in her truck, hands shaking, replaying the moment when the road had simply vanished. Later, a state trooper came by to take her statement. He told her floodwaters had damaged the levees earlier that day, and warning signs hadn't been set out in time. The official report would later echo this: the bridge failed because rising water compromised its support, and the lack of timely warnings turned a dangerous situation into a deadly one. As the sun came up, Carter could see the full wreckage: chunks of concrete missing, steel twisted, vehicles half submerged. News crews set up along the shoulder. She watched the rescue teams search for survivors, thinking about how close she'd come to going over the edge herself. After a night like that, she changed her own rules. Never trust that a bridge is safe just because it's standing. From then on, she slowed down at every crossing, checked the weather, and listened for warnings. She understood now that not all dangers are obvious, and sometimes the road's biggest threat is the one you can't see. She finished her coffee and started her truck, moving slowly away from the scene. The bridge would be closed for weeks, and she'd have to find a new route. The memory of that night stayed with her, a reminder that the road isn't always what it seems. She didn't talk much about it to other drivers, but she noticed herself paying closer attention to every unfamiliar sound and every stretch of highway that looked a little too quiet. There are some things you can prepare for, and some you can't. Carter learned to respect both, and as she set out on her next run, she knew that not all dangers on the highway come from the road itself. Sometimes it's the people you meet, or think you meet, that leave the deepest mark. Tyler Brooks didn't trust the road, but he trusted his own instincts. He kept a lucky coin in his pocket, a habit picked up from his first year driving, even though he'd tell anyone he wasn't superstitious. Heading west on Interstate 70 through the Rockies, the sky was clear, but the night pressed in heavy. That's when he saw a man in the median, standing still in the cold, arms tucked tight. Something made Tyler slow down. Maybe it was the empty stretch of highway, or maybe it was that coin in his pocket, warm from his hand. Either way, he pulled over. The man climbed up into the cab without a word of hesitation. He introduced himself as Matt. He looked young, maybe 30, but there was a worn-out look about him, clothes damp, hair plastered to his forehead, skin pale beneath the cab's dome light. Tyler shook Matt's hand out of reflex and felt the chill in his grip. "Where are you headed?" Tyler asked, keeping his voice level. Matt hesitated, then said, "Just until the next exit." His voice was thin, like he was trying not to draw attention, and he kept glancing out the window, not meeting Tyler's eyes. Tyler nodded and merged back onto the highway. The cab filled with the steady hum of tires and the faint smell of wet fabric. He tried to focus on the road, but Matt's presence made that hard. The guy couldn't sit still. His fingers tapped the glass, twisted the seam of his jeans, and drummed on the dash. Every minute or so, he'd lean forward to look in the side mirror, neck craned, scanning the darkness behind them. "You all right?" Tyler asked after a few miles, trying to keep things casual. Matt kept his eyes on the window. "Yeah, just checking how much farther, how long till the exit." Tyler checked the clock. 15 minutes, not much longer. Matt nodded but didn't relax. He shifted in his seat, hands never stopping. A few minutes passed in silence. Then Matt spoke again, voice lower this time. You ever notice how the air changes at night? Like something's out there, just past the headlights. He said it like it was a fact, not a question. Tyler didn't answer. He'd heard odd things from lonely drivers before, but this felt different. The cab felt smaller, the air heavier. Matt kept glancing at the mirror, more anxious with every mile. They drove the rest of the way mostly silent. Tyler's grip tightened on the wheel. He caught himself wishing he'd kept moving, wishing he'd ignored the urge to stop. The coin in his pocket felt heavier than ever. As they neared the exit, Matt sat up straighter. "That's it," he said, pointing at the faint glow of a gas station sign. Tyler nodded, slowed down, and took the ramp. The lot was mostly empty, lights buzzing overhead, the night colder now that they'd stopped. "I'll drop you here," Tyler said, putting the truck in park. He turned to gesture toward the gas station, but the seat beside him was empty. The passenger door was closed. The seatbelt was unlatched, and water droplets still marked the vinyl where Matt had sat. Tyler stared, heart thudding, trying to make sense of it. He hadn't heard the door open. He hadn't felt the truck shift. He got out and looked around the lot. The gas station was quiet. A lone clerk slouched behind the counter. Tyler went inside, feeling the chill settle deeper in his bones. "Did you see a guy come in here?" he asked. "Dark jacket? About my height?" The clerk didn't look up from his magazine. "No one's come in for an hour." Tyler stepped back outside, scanning the lot, the empty sidewalk, the row of parked trucks. No sign of Matt. Only the damp patch on the passenger seat proved anyone had been there. He got back in the cab and sat for a minute, staring at the empty seat. He thought about calling someone, but what would he say? He started the engine and pulled out onto the highway, the feeling of unease following him, tight as a knot in his chest. An hour later, at a way station, he finally told a state trooper what happened. The trooper listened without interrupting, then leaned back and let out a slow breath. "You're not the first to see him," the trooper said. "That stretch of I-70, drivers have picked up a hitchhiker just like you described. Name's always Matt, always looks lost, always asks for the next exit. Then he disappears." Tyler frowned. "You're serious?" The trooper nodded. "There was a wreck on that median decades back. Guy never made it home. Some folks say he's still trying." Tyler looked down at his hands. "So I picked up a ghost." The trooper shrugged. "You picked up something. Most drivers keep their doors locked now. You should too." Tyler drove on, the coin in his pocket colder than before. He kept his eyes on the road and his doors locked, no matter how empty the highway felt. He never picked up another hitchhiker. That rule stuck, even when the night was long and the road ahead was empty. Sometimes the only thing you can trust is your own rule book. On the open highway, you never know who's following or what waits in the dark behind you. Jessica Reed had always felt at home behind the wheel on empty highways. The lonelier the road, the more she could settle into the rhythm of driving. US 93 in Nevada, a long stretch through open desert, was one of her favorites. That night, the moonlight made the flat land look even emptier. She drove with the window cracked just enough to let in the dry air. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where you might not see another car for an hour. So when a single set of headlights showed up in her rearview mirror, she noticed right away. At first, she didn't think much of it. Maybe someone else was just making the long haul north. The car kept its distance, never getting closer, never fading away. She tried to ignore it, but the feeling of being watched started to creep in. She caught herself checking the mirror more often than usual, her shoulders tensing each time. The car didn't pass. It didn't fall back. It just hovered at that perfect spot, always in sight, never in focus. Jessica tried to reason with herself. Drivers acted strangely on these endless roads. Sometimes they just needed another pair of taillights to follow. Still, something about the way that car stayed with her felt wrong. She wondered briefly if it was local law enforcement running a training exercise. The thought made her uneasy. If that was the case, why not just pull her over? Why keep their distance and mirror her every move? She kept her eyes on the road and tried to let it go. But then a second set of headlights appeared behind the first. This one joined just as quietly, sliding into formation and matching the same careful distance. Two cars now, both refusing to pass or fall away, both tracking her speed and lane changes. Jessica's stomach tightened. She flicked on her turn signal and moved into the right lane, hoping at least one would go around. They followed, shifting lanes in perfect sync. Her grip on the wheel tightened. She watched the mirrors, counting the seconds between glances. The cars never closed the gap. Their headlights just bounced along the asphalt, always steady, always present. Then a third car joined. It slipped into place behind the others, as if this was all planned out ahead of time. She tried to convince herself it was a coincidence, but the pattern was too precise. 3 cars, all moving together, all refusing to break formation. The stretch of US 93 she was on didn't offer many options. No exits for miles, no gas stations, nothing but the desert and the faint hum of the engine. She reached for her CB radio and flipped through every channel. Static. No voices, no chatter. She tried her phone, stretching it toward the windshield, but there was no signal. Even her GPS started to glitch, the screen flickering and then going dark. She tapped it, hoping for a reset, but nothing worked. The sense of isolation pressed in harder. She was truly alone out there. Jessica eased her foot onto the accelerator, pushing her truck a little faster. The convoy behind her responded in kind, keeping perfect pace. She flashed her high beams, hoping to startle them or get some kind of reaction. The lights stayed steady, no horn, no flashback. She tried slowing down, then speeding up again, but the cars matched her every move. She thought about pulling over, but every instinct told her not to stop. Out here, with no one else around, stopping felt like the worst possible idea. The air in the cab felt thick. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck, even though the night was cool. Rolling her shoulders did nothing to ease the tension. She focused on the white lines ahead, counting down the miles to the next speck of civilization she could remember from the map. She told herself that if she could just make it to Shelbourne or Pioche, she'd be fine. The miles dragged on. The convoy stayed with her, silent and deliberate. Every so often, she caught glimpses of the desert stretching out on both sides, empty and unforgiving. The only sound was the steady thrum of tires and the low whine of the engine. She tried not to think about what the drivers behind her wanted or what they might do if she stopped. She just kept moving. Finally, as the first hint of morning started to show over the mountains, the convoy began to break apart. One car peeled off onto a barely visible turnoff, its headlights disappearing into the darkness. Another slowed down until its lights faded in the distance. The last one lingered a little longer, then dropped away without warning. Jessica didn't relax. She kept driving for another 30 minutes, refusing to let herself believe she was safe until the road behind her was empty and the sky was turning orange. When she finally reached a small town and parked in the lot of a dusty motel, she let herself breathe. She checked her phone, expecting nothing, but found a new message waiting. No subject, no words, just a single photo attached. Her truck caught in the dark, headlights glowing against the desert. The timestamp matched the night before. The angle was perfect, close enough to see her rig's details, far enough to prove whoever took it had kept their distance. Her stomach dropped. Someone had been watching her, not just following, and they wanted her to know it. She stared at the image for a long time, thumb hovering over the screen. The memory of those headlights, the synchronized movements, and the dead silence of her radio all came back in a rush. She deleted the photo, but it didn't help. The feeling stayed with her. That night she made herself a new rule: never trust what you see in the mirrors after dark. She started covering them with a towel when she parked. Even now she finds herself looking over her shoulder on empty roads, waiting for headlights to appear and fall into line. Some roads test your nerves, some test your luck. Others remind you that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, all it takes is a wrong turn or a glitch in your GPS to lead you straight into the unknown. Eric Miller hadn't planned on leaving the main highway that night. He relied on his GPS the way most truckers do, but when the unit froze mid-route and wouldn't reset, he had to follow the detour signs through a maze of construction barriers. The familiar hum of I-95 dropped away, replaced by a silence that felt wrong. He watched the numbers on his dash and tried to pick up CB chatter, but the radio stayed dead. No voices, no warnings, just static. The only sound left was the thrum of his tires on the narrow, empty road. He turned the music off and focused on the dark ahead, feeling the kind of tension that comes from knowing you're too far from help. He didn't see any headlights in either direction. The road twisted through the trees, and the darkness pressed in. Miller gripped the wheel tighter. He'd been driving for almost 15 years and had seen his share of strange nights. But something about this stretch put him on edge. He checked his mirrors, half expecting another truck, but the world behind him was just as empty as the road ahead. A sudden figure darted into the lane. Miller hit the brakes, the truck's weight shifting as he fought to keep control. The headlights caught a woman standing in the road, arms wrapped around herself like she was freezing, though the air outside was thick and warm. Next to her, a man stood hunched over, one arm pressed to his side as if nursing a wound. Their car was off to the right, crumpled at the hood, taillights glowing faintly in the weeds. She waved with both hands, face drawn and voice trembling. "Please, can you help us?" Miller hesitated, watching her. Truckers are trained to help. First aid, basic rescue, the rules drilled in from day one. He reached behind his seat for his first aid kit, thinking through his checklist. But something about the scene made his skin crawl. The man by the car didn't look at him, just stared at the ground, silent and unmoving. Miller called out, "What happened?" He stayed by his truck, keeping a few paces between him and the pair. The woman stepped closer, her hands shaking. "We got carjacked," she said, voice cracking. "They took everything. We just need to call for help. Please." She glanced back at the man, then at Miller, her eyes wide and pleading. He scanned the woods, trying to spot movement. "Where did they go?" he asked. She paused. The hesitation was small, but it was enough. In that moment, her expression changed. The fear dropped away, replaced by something harder. Her shoulders straightened, her voice lost its tremor. "Does it matter?" she said, her tone flat. The man by the car stood up straighter. Miller backed up, but before he could reach the cab, 3 more men stepped out from the trees. One carried a tire iron, swinging it by his side. Another had a knife, blade catching the truck's light. They closed in fast, cutting off his escape. "Wallet, keys, and phone," one of them barked. "Now, don't try anything." The woman stepped aside, her face cold, her role finished. Miller's mind raced. He could feel the first aid kit in his hand, but it wouldn't help now. He kept his eyes on the knife and the tire iron. Years of training told him to stay calm, but his hands shook. He remembered the alarm remote clipped to his belt, a habit from too many nights alone at truck stops. He pressed the button. The truck's alarm exploded into the night, horn blaring, lights strobing, the sound bouncing off the trees. The attackers flinched, turning toward the sudden chaos. Miller ran for the cab, boots slipping in the gravel. Someone shouted, but the alarms swallowed the words. He yanked the door open and threw himself inside. The man with the knife lunged, but Miller slammed the door, locked it, and jammed the truck into gear. Tires spun, gravel flew, and he powered down the road, not looking back until the headlights showed nothing but empty pavement. He drove until he found a gas station with bright lights and a few other trucks in the lot. He parked and sat with the engine running, hands gripping the wheel. His heart was still pounding. He kept seeing the woman's face. How quickly she dropped the act, how her eyes had gone flat and cold. He replayed the moment again and again, thinking about what could have happened if he hadn't remembered the alarm. The next morning, Miller came back from the diner and found a note tucked under his windshield wiper. The paper was damp, the writing jagged. "You got away this time. Next time you won't be so lucky." He stared at it for a long time before folding it up and putting it in his pocket. He called the police. The officer who took his statement didn't sound surprised. "You're not the first," he said. "They target truckers on this stretch. Sometimes they just want money. Sometimes it's worse." Miller listened as the officer explained that this group had been working the area for months, using fake breakdowns and staged injuries to lure drivers in. There were reports of robberies, missing persons, and rigs found abandoned miles from the scene. "They count on you stopping," the officer said. "That's how they set the trap." After that night, Miller changed everything about his routine. He installed a dash cam that sent footage and his location to his wife's phone every hour. He double-checked the locks before every stop. He avoided side roads, even if it meant adding hours to his route. If he saw someone flagging him down on a dark road, he kept driving unless there were other trucks or a marked patrol car already there. He told himself it was about safety, but he knew it was also about fear. The memory of the woman's sudden shift, how quickly trust became danger, stayed with him, sharper than any nightmare. He started sleeping with the alarm remote next to his pillow. He didn't talk about that night with other drivers, but he watched their eyes in the mirror at truck stops, looking for signs that they'd seen something similar. People ask him sometimes why he doesn't stop to help anymore. He just shakes his head and says, "Now, I don't pull over for anyone after dark, unless I see multiple lit cabs or a highway patrol cruiser. The rules are the rules, not suggestions. Some drivers think the worst is over once you get back on the main highway. The rest of me is already wondering what might be waiting at the next stop and how quickly everything can change. When you've been driving highways for 20 years, you expect danger to come from the road itself, slick patches, blown tires, maybe a deer darting out in the dark. I never expected it to come from another person, standing in the shadows just past mile marker 212 north of Oklahoma City. That's where it happened. Late one night, the land flat and empty, the city lights gone behind me. I almost missed the wreck. The median was dark, and the flash of something metallic caught my eye just as I was about to pass. I slowed, eased onto the shoulder, and let my rig idle with the hazards on. The air smelled like burnt rubber and hot metal. I grabbed my flashlight and a small first aid kit, then headed toward the crumpled car lying upside down in the grass. Steam and faint wisps of smoke curled up from the hood, mixing together in the night air. The undercarriage was exposed, wheels still spinning slowly, and the glass was shattered everywhere. Inside, I spotted a woman, her face pale, hair stuck to her forehead, one arm trapped awkwardly by the collapsed roof. She looked at me, eyes wide, but managed a faint groan. I crouched down, careful of the broken glass, and tried to keep my voice steady. I called 911. "Stay with me." "What's your name?" She whispered, "Emily." I told her to keep talking if she could and checked her for bleeding or broken bones, just like I'd been trained. I kept glancing up at the road, hoping to see the flashing lights of an ambulance. Instead, headlights cut through the darkness, slow and deliberate. An old blue pickup rolled to a stop about 50 yards away, half on the shoulder, half in the grass. The engine idled rough, one taillight missing, the other flickering. I waited for the driver to get out, maybe to help, but nobody moved. The cab light stayed off. I could just make out a heavy-set man in a big coat and a baseball cap, pulled low, sitting motionless behind the wheel. I waved my flashlight, trying to signal him. "Hey, you okay? Can you help?" The man didn't answer. He just sat there, watching. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. Something about the way he stayed in the shadows, not moving, not even rolling down his window, made everything feel wrong. After a minute, the driver's door creaked open. The man stepped out, slow and heavy. He walked to the edge of the median and stopped, close enough for me to see the tire iron hanging at his side. His coat looked too warm for the night, and his face was mostly hidden under the brim of his cap. He didn't look at Emily or the wreck, just at me. "You should leave," he said, voice low and even. "This isn't your problem." I didn't answer right away. My heart was pounding, and I glanced at Emily, who was still trapped and barely conscious. I knew I couldn't leave her, but I also knew I was outmatched if this man decided to do more than just threaten. I tried to keep my voice calm. "Man, she needs help. The ambulance is on the way." He didn't move. He just watched, grip tightening on the tire iron. I thought about my phone, still in my hand from calling 911. I raised it, pretending to snap a photo of his face. "You want to be famous?" I said, forcing a smile I didn't feel. The screen glowed in the dark and I held it steady, hoping he'd notice. For a second he hesitated. His shoulders shifted, and he looked back at his truck. I stayed where I was, phone pointed right at him, not daring to blink. He didn't leave. He just stood there, silent, the pickup's headlights flooding the scene. I kept talking to Emily, trying to keep her awake, all the while keeping the man in my peripheral vision. The minutes stretched out, and the only sounds were the hiss of steam from the wreck and the low idle of the truck's engine. Then, in the distance, I heard sirens. The man heard them too. He stiffened, took a step back, and then turned quickly, tossing the tire iron into the bed of his truck. He climbed in, slammed the door, and the pickup roared back to life. He spun the wheels in the grass, headlights sweeping across me and Emily as he peeled away, disappearing up the highway. The ambulance and a state trooper arrived within a minute. Paramedics rushed to get Emily out, and I stepped back, still clutching my phone. When I told the trooper what happened, he didn't seem surprised. "We've had a few reports of a guy like that. Shows up at accident scenes, tries to scare people off. Sometimes he just watches. Sometimes he's more aggressive." He looked at the empty stretch of highway, then back at me. "You did the right thing staying put and calling for help." I nodded, but the whole drive home, I kept thinking about that man, the way he hovered at the edge of the scene, turning a moment of help into something dangerous. I started avoiding that stretch of I-35 altogether, especially after dark. I picked up a small can of pepper spray and kept it in the cab, right next to my phone. It wasn't much, but it made me feel like I had one more tool if something like that happened again. It's easy to think that the worst part of a crash is the crash itself, but sometimes the aftermath is where the real danger waits. I still remember the way the man's headlights cut through the dark, and the feeling that help can draw out something you're not ready for. That night changed my rules. I pay more attention to what's happening around me, not just the road ahead. I don't stop for every wreck, and when I do, I keep my guard up and my phone ready. There's a kind of threat on the highway that doesn't show up in the statistics. It waits for the right moment. When you're distracted, when you're trying to help, when you think you're safe because the worst should be over. It's not just the road you have to worry about. Sometimes, it's what's waiting in the shadows, just outside the reach of your headlights. The open road looks empty, but the real hazards are often the ones you don't see coming. Highways promise freedom, but their real danger often comes from the choices and people you meet along the way. It's not just about weather or road conditions. Sometimes it's about who's waiting for you to let your guard down. As Eric Miller said, some roads aren't dangerous for what's under you, but for who waits in the dark. Staying safe means trusting your instincts, checking your surroundings before you stop, and not hesitating to put your own safety first. Do you trust strangers on the road? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more real danger stories. Hit like if you'll think twice next time you see a help sign under the stars.